I believe it's the blame game, isn't it? It's the blame game that happens back then at the time of John the Baptist with Herod and Jesus. And I would surmise to say that the blame game goes on even today. So when we read that gospel story, um, there was a need that could have happened by the people who were participating in the banquet that the king was having. There was an urgency in that nation. There was an urgency to confront with love. And I wonder, where are our wounds and scars because we stood up and spoke out for something? Is there nothing worth fighting for? Could you not stand up and speak for someone, somebody? God is Lord over our conscience. And can you imagine after all that happened in that gospel reading, that party, what had happened? That fox, that Herod, he was all about malicious destruction, destroy anything that what had been and anything that was valuable, like, well, you name it. And who is the vulnerable one here? Who is always the vulnerable? Fill it in. We know that that fox isn't in it for himself. Not then, not even today. So there's foxes everywhere. It's the Herods of the world. They could be in Jerusalem or Rome or Washington, D.C. There's always a Herod, always someone who's a puppet for the Herod, always somebody willing to play the blame game, and someone who seeks power without accountability, and who wants to be greedy and take over. Who is the value? Who is of value in vulnerable? So where are you with your wounds because you've stood up for something? Why do we not challenge things that are happening? I don't know. Is there nothing worth standing up for today? Now, we know back then John was certainly of value and he was vulnerable. That woman hated him. So who would stand up for him? Nobody. In the story, it's very ugly and it's very disturbing. But if you could only see yourself in the story, enter in, who would you be? Are you an observer or a participant in the story? That daughter, she was the youngest daughter of the youngest and only daughter of the family, and she was asked to entertain, as is wont to do so many times with all families, especially if you have a daughter who is talented. She could be a dancer, she could be a piano player, she could be a singer. She's the one who is asked when there's a family function or a bunch of people together to perform. And all she's asked to do is be appropriate, don't ask questions, just perform to the best of your ability. Just charm. Just charm the people who are there and then just get out of the way. And the king, the host of the party, I don't know, maybe he was drunker than usual, but he was totally smitten by the performance of his wife's daughter. And at the end of her performance, I mean, she was tired and exhausted and probably excited and all the feelings that you can feel after you've done a great performance. And he, of course, he was just absolutely smitten with all that she had done and clapped with great approval. And everybody clapped with great approval. And he was just so overwhelmed. He said, half of my kingdom, you can have half of my kingdom, whatever you want, it's all yours. It was a magnanimous generosity that he expressed. She's young. So she goes to her mother and she asks her mother, what should I be asking for? And that mom? Well, who is that mom? Well, the preacher called her out, that preacher, John the Baptist. Time and time again, he called her out for who she was and what she presented to the people. And that John, he was kind of a wild looking guy, did weird things, but he had a lot of followers. But the girl went and asked her mother, what should I ask for? You could get all the riches of the kingdom, more slaves, more whatever. Who was she to think of what horrible thing her mother would ask for? And she was told. Her mother said, "Ask for the head of John the Baptist on a silver platter." I would imagine that the daughter was horrified, didn't know what to do, but she had asked her mother, and I'm sure she was very sad. But what was she to do? She could have gone away and given time for the king to rethink his promise, but she delivered the request without question. And yes, she should have delayed. She should have questioned. She should have given that drunk king time to think it over. But she didn't. She could have done something, maybe. So she goes to bed. And she's having a very restless kind of sleep. She's feeling very guilty over all that had happened. And she's convinced herself, I was not responsible. He did that and she did that. She was only doing what she was told. It was not her idea. She's just a kid. What difference could she have made after all? The event was just a big thing for her to perform. She lays back on her pillow, she breathes deep, and she tries to pretend it didn't even happen. So she did what she was told. She asked no questions. And that mother, she's the adult, after all. And to her satisfaction, she got her wish. She wanted that man, that one who spoke against her all the time, out of the picture. I could imagine her just sitting there with her arms snugly tucked and smiling like, I finally got what I wanted. He has been silenced. It's not her fault after all, because Herod was the one, my husband was the one who made such a stupid request to the daughter. You can have whatever you want. But revenge. Oh, it's so sweet, isn't it? And the mother was rid of that man. And I wonder, what did her decision do to her daughter? The evening was over. It was bedtime. Mom goes to bed and she's starting to see images. And it's not of John. It's the face of his cousin, who's a little bit more presentable, but he has a lot more followers than John ever thought of having. And he's not so shabby. And he's preaching too. And he's preaching all that love stuff, love your enemies. Always, that family, they're always just making trouble. I live in the real world. And so she went to sleep. And Herod, well, the husband, the king, he tried to sleep, but he remembered there were times when he had sleepless nights, and he would go down to the jail and he would listen as John, who was in prison, would be like preaching to whoever else was in prison. And he liked listening to him. It confronted him, but it also comforted him in some way. His words were fascinating, and, well, they kind of bewildered Herod so much that the words just stuck in his mind. John was very captivating, but full of humility. He grabbed Herod's heart by his speaking. But he always said, I'm not the big shot. I'm preparing the way for another one who is to come. And Herod, he shuddered at what had happened. What could she have asked for besides this? Why? Why did she ask for John's head on a silver platter? And that daughter, oh, she came to me and her cheeks were just flushed with excitement, or maybe shame, or just absolute terror. And he, the King Herod, he was shocked and revolted. But, he had made that stupid vow, that stupid promise, and he was powerful and he liked all that. So he didn't feel that he could deny her request. What would people think of him if he changed his mind? I'm powerful and I like it, but what if I step down? He couldn't express a doubt and look weak. He couldn't waver and look less powerful. It was a mistake, but he had made a promise and he was going to see it through. And all those people that were at the banquet, they all stood around too. And oh, those friends that came for the body of John, oh, they came and their devotion was so obvious. And he wondered, did anyone care that way for him? Then he knew that John's message would never really die. He was a powerful man, wasn't he? And finally went to sleep. And those banquet officials and the participants at the party, they gossiped for a long time afterwards. "Oh, that girl, she was so foolish." Another one said, no, it wasn't her. It was her mother's idea. After all, John had always made comments about the mother and the mother's behavior. Another one would say, just another life. It's gone. So what? And the king was sickened to give the order. Why did he still do it? I guess they said it was his fault. He gave in to her wishes. He knew they weren't the daughter's wishes, but they were the wife's wishes. But he gave in all the same. And the girl, the mother, Herod, well, I guess that's the rich and the powerful, right? And how about the rest? Could they have done something? Were we part of the rest? Could we have done something? Each could have stopped it. Even the spectators, those who stand by and do nothing. Well, sometimes the spectators don't even try. They don't speak up. They don't stand up for anything. They don't even try. After all, it's none of my business. But it was. And the people said, Amen. And as an afterthought, I ask, have you ever just gone along with, did something with no questions asked? Have you ever made unreasonable promises? And have you ever just stood by and did nothing? Are we guilty of some things? And again, the people said,